Hello again, 122. In this video, we will do Chapter 30, South Asia and East Asia from the end of World War II to the present, and we will attempt to answer the first two questions here in this video. Why British India was divided into two nations, India and Pakistan, and we'll describe how India achieved democracy. And it achieved it differently from South Africa. When Nelson Mandela was finally let out of house arrest more than 30 years, South Africa will achieve democracy peacefully. Whereas, as we'll see here, relations between Hindus and Muslims in India created an extremely violent and deadly situation that they were not able to resolve peacefully. So that's the difference, is that South Africa did it with relatively little problems. Mandela was an outstanding leader in making the transition from the white Afrikaner rule and the apartheid system into a multicultural and multiracial society that South Africa is today. Now, in South Asia, in 1947, nearly 2 centuries of British colonial rule came to an end when two new independent nations, India and Pakistan, came into being. And this will be the end of the British Raj. And during the 1930s, the nationalist movement in India was severely shaken by factional disagreements between Hindus and Muslims, and the outbreak of World War II subdued these sectarian clashes, but they erupted again after the war ended in 1945. Battles between Hindus and Muslims broke out in several cities, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the leader of the Muslim League, demanded the creation of a separate state for each. Meanwhile, the Labour Party, which had long been critical of the British colonial legacy on both moral and economic grounds, had come to power in Britain, and the new Prime Minister, Clement Attlee, announced that power would be transferred to responsible Indian hands by June of 1948, and Lord Mountbatten was sent there as a representative of the British government to ease this transition. But the imminence of independence did not dampen communal strife. As riots escalated, the British reluctantly accepted the inevitability of partition and declared that on August 15, 1947, two independent nations, Hindu India and Muslim Pakistan, would be established. Pakistan would be divided between the main area of Muslim habitation in the Indus River Valley in the west and a separate territory in East Bengal, 2,000 miles to the east. Although Mahatma Gandhi warned that the partition would provoke an orgy of blood, and that's from L. Collins and D. LaPierre in Freedom at Midnight, in New York Press, 1975, page 252. Gandhi was increasingly regarded as a figure of the past, and his views were ignored. And the British instructed the rulers in the princely states to choose which state they would join by August 15th. But problems arose in predominantly Hindu Hyderabad, and where the Nawab, the viceroy, was a Muslim, and mountainous Kashmir, where a Hindu prince ruled over a Muslim population. After independence was declared, the flight of millions of Hindus and Muslims across the borders led to the violence and the deaths of more than 1 million people. And Gandhi went on a fast to try to get the violence to end. And unfortunately, one of the casualties was Gandhi himself, who was assassinated on January 30, 1948, as he was going to morning prayer. The assassin, a Hindu militant, was apparently motivated by Gandhi's opposition to a Hindu India. Now, independent India. With independence, the Indian National Congress, now renamed the Congress Party, moved from opposition to responsibility of power under Jawaharlal Nehru, the new Prime Minister. And the prospect must have been intimidating. The vast majority of India's 400 million people were poor and illiterate. The new nation encompassed a significant number of ethnic groups and 14 major languages. And there's some call today to go back to using English because of all of these different languages. During the British Raj, English was used for formal relations and in institutions. And although the Congress Party leaders spoke bravely of building a new nation, Indian society still bore the scars of past wars and divisions. The government's first problem was to resolve the disputes left over from the transition period, and the rulers of Hyderabad and Kashmir both followed their own preferences rather than the wishes of their subject populations. Nehru was determined to include both states within India, and in 1948, Indian troops invaded Hyderabad and annexed the area. India was also able to seize most of Kashmir, but at a cost of creating an intractable problem that has poisoned relations with Pakistan to the present day. And their transition now to democracy, they will have an experiment for many, many decades in democratic socialism. Nehru had been influenced by British socialism, and he patterned his economic policy roughly after the program of British labor. The state took over the ownership of major industries and resources, transportation and utilities, while private enterprise was permitted at the local and retail levels. Farmland remained in private hands, but rural cooperatives were officially encouraged. In other respects, Nehru was a devotee of Western materialism. He was convinced that to succeed, India must industrialize, and in advocating industrialization, Nehru departed sharply from Gandhi, who believed that materialism was morally corrupting and that only the simplicity and nonviolence, as represented by the traditional Indian village and the symbolic spinning wheel, could save India and the world itself from self-destruction. The primary themes of Nehru's foreign policy were anti-colonialism and anti-racism. Under his guidance, India took a neutral stance in the Cold War and sought to provide leadership to all newly independent nations in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. India's neutrality put it at odds with the United States, which during the 1950s was trying to mobilize all nations against what it viewed as the menace of international communism, as we've seen. Relations with Pakistan continued to be troubled. India refused to consider Pakistan's claim to Kashmir, even though the majority of the population there were Muslims. Tensions between the two countries persisted. And when there were riots against the Pakistani government in East Pakistan in 1971, after a monstrous typhoon and flood really destroyed the country, India intervened on the side of East Pakistan, which declared its independence as the new nation of Bangladesh. And these two areas, West Pakistan, Pakistan proper here in the west, and East Pakistan. Again, there was 2,000 miles between them. And this is an independent nation today. All of these areas are largely Muslim, and India remains predominantly Hindu. The post-Nehru era. Nehru's death in 1964 aroused concern that Indian democracy was dependent on the Nehru mystique. When his successor, a Congress Party veteran, died in 1966, party leaders selected Nehru's daughter, Indira Gandhi, no relation to Mahatma, as the new prime minister. Gandhi was inexperienced in politics, but she quickly showed the steely determination of her father. Like Nehru, Gandhi embraced democratic socialism and a policy of neutrality in foreign affairs, but she was more activist in promoting her objectives than her father. To combat rural poverty, she nationalized banks, provided loans to peasants on easy terms, built low-cost housing, distributed land to the landless, and introduced electoral reforms to enfranchise the poor. Gandhi was especially worried by India's growing population, and in an effort to curb the growth rate, they adopted a policy of forced sterilization. This policy was unpopular, and along with growing official corruption and Gandhi's authoritarian tactics, it led to her defeat in the general election in 1975, the first time that the Congress Party had failed to win a majority at the national level. And a minority government of pro-capitalist parties was formed, and that's what's been going on more in the 21st century, ladies and gentlemen, more capitalist policies. But 2 years later, Indira Gandhi was back in power, and she now faced a new challenge, however, in the rise of religious strife. The most dangerous situation was in the Punjab, where militant Sikhs were demanding autonomy or even independence from India, and Gandhi did not shrink from a confrontation and attacked Sikh rebels hiding in their golden temple in the city of Amritsar. And the incident aroused widespread anger among the Sikh community, and in 1984, Sikh members of Gandhi's personal bodyguard assassinated her. By now, Congress Party politicians were convinced that the party cannot remain in power without a member of the Nehru family at the helm. And Gandhi's son, Rajiv Gandhi, who was a commercial airline pilot with little interest in politics, he was persuaded to replace his mother as prime minister. Rajiv lacked the strong ideological and political convictions of his mother and grandfather and allowed a greater role for private enterprise. But his government was criticized for cronyism, inefficiency, and corruption. Rajiv also sought to play a role in regional affairs, and he mediated a dispute between the government in Sri Lanka and the Tamil rebels, the Elam Tigers, who were ethnically related to the majority population in southern India. But that decision cost him his life. While campaigning for re-election in 1991, he was assassinated by a member of the Tiger organization. Now India faced the future without a member of the Nehru family as prime minister. And this is a nice chronology of South Asia since 1945. There was a destruction of a mosque in that 1992. Benazir Bhutto was removed from power in Pakistan by the military, and General Musharraf will rule Pakistan for a number of years. And he had a lot of tension with the United States because eventually we move into Afghanistan to get rid of the Taliban, and the Taliban will hide out in Pakistan. And that created problems with Pakistan. And the Congress Party comes back into power in the early 21st century. Miss Bhutto attempted to get back into politics, and she was assassinated. There were massive floods in the Indus River Valley in 2010, and Osama bin Laden will be found hiding in Pakistan, which further exacerbated relations between the United States and Pakistan. And the Hindu Bharatiya Janata Party, or the BJP, actively vied with the Congress Party for control of the central and state governments in the last decade. And this is a Hindu nationalist party. And this has created political instability because, again, this creates more tension between Hindus and Muslims. And that ends this particular part of South Asia.